Welcome, dear listener, to this quiet corner of the night, where stories unfold like gentle dreams, and mysteries dissolve into the comfort of sleep. I am here with you tonight to share a tale that will carry you softly through the hours of darkness. A story designed not to startle or alarm, but to wrap around you like a warm blanket on a winter evening. This is a place where thoughts can slow, where breathing deepens, and where the racing mind finds permission to rest. Perhaps you have had a long day. Perhaps the world feels too bright and too loud, and you have come here seeking refuge in narrative, in atmosphere, in the gentle unfolding of something mysterious yet comforting. Before we begin our journey together into Victorian London, into gaslit streets, and the warmth of 221B Baker Street, I invite you to settle yourself completely. Adjust your pillows, draw your covers close, dim the lights until only shadows remain, and let your body sink into whatever surface holds you now. Take a breath with me, slow and deep, filling your lungs with calm, releasing whatever tension the day has woven into your shoulders, your jaw, your thoughts. And now, before you drift too far into sleep, I wonder, write in the comments what time it is for you and where you are from. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and breathe with me as we begin. The rain arrives in London on the evening of December the 17th, 1891, not with thunder or dramatic pronouncement, but as a whisper, a gentle persistence that darkens the cobblestones and blurs the gas lamps into golden halos of light. It is the kind of rain that speaks of winter settling in for a long stay, the kind that makes fires seem brighter and rooms more precious. At 221B Baker Street, the sitting room glows with warmth, the fireplace crackling with a voice all its own, each pop and hiss a small comfort against the December darkness pressing at the windows. The curtains, heavy burgundy velvet that Mrs. Hudson selected years ago, are drawn almost closed, leaving only a narrow gap through which the wet street below can be glimpsed, all shadows and lamplight, and the occasional passing figure hunched against the weather. Dr. John Watson sits in his familiar armchair, positioned at an angle to both fire and window, a posture he has adopted through years of evenings spent in this very room. His medical journal rests open on his lap, though his eyes have drifted from the dense text more than once in the past hour, drawn instead to the dancing flames, or to the figure of his friend, who occupies the space before the fireplace, with that peculiar stillness that Watson has come to recognize as intense thought. Sherlock Holmes stands with one hand resting on the mantelpiece, his profile sharp against the firelight, his dressing gown a deep wine colour that seems to absorb and reflect the flames simultaneously. He has not moved for nearly 20 minutes, and Watson knows better than to interrupt whatever mental process occupies that remarkable mind. The clock on the mantel ticks steadily, a bronze piece with an ornate face that catches the firelight with each swing of its pendulum. The sound is rhythmic, hypnotic, blending with the soft patter of rain against glass and the gentle settling of coals in the grate. Steam rises from 2 cups of tea on the side table between the chairs, Earl Grey with just a touch of honey, the way Mrs. Hudson knows they prefer it on cold evenings. The scent mingles with the ever-present aroma of old books, leather, tobacco, and that indefinable quality of a room long lived in, a space that has absorbed years of conversation and contemplation and comfortable silence. Watson turns a page in his journal, though he absorbs little of what is written there. His mind wanders instead to the season, to Christmas, approaching with its promise of decorated trees and carol singers, and the small decorations Mrs. Hudson has already begun placing around the flat, despite Holmes's protestations that such frivolity serves no logical purpose. There is something peaceful about these December evenings, Watson thinks, something that makes even the most restless mind seek stillness, seek warmth, seek the company of old friends and familiar rooms. The knock, when it comes, is so soft that at first Watson thinks he has imagined it, but then it comes again, tentative, almost apologetic, and Holmes's head turns sharply toward the door. "Come," Holmes calls, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room, and the door opens to reveal Mrs. Hudson, her face bearing that particular expression of concern mixed with curiosity that Watson has seen many times before. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she says, her voice low and respectful of the evening's peace. "There is a gentleman downstairs who wishes to speak with you. He arrived without appointment, and I would have turned him away at such an hour. But he seems quite distressed, and he mentioned that the matter concerns children." She pauses, wringing her hand slightly in her apron. "Several missing children," he said, "and something about an old legend." Holmes's entire demeanour shifts in an instant, the stillness replaced by focused attention. "Show him up immediately, Mrs. Hudson," he says, moving away from the fireplace toward his chair. "Watson, would you mind adding another log to the fire? Our visitor will likely be quite chilled from the rain." Watson rises, grateful for the movement, and selects a substantial piece of oak from the basket beside the hearth. The log settles into the flames with a shower of sparks that climb the chimney like tiny stars, and the fire responds with renewed vigour, casting dancing shadows across the Persian carpet and up the walls lined with books and the organised chaos of Holmes's reference materials. He returns to his chair just as footsteps sound on the stairs, slow and heavy, the tread of someone carrying a great weight of worry. The man who enters is perhaps 40 years old, though concern has etched lines around his eyes that might belong to someone older. He is respectably dressed in a dark coat, still beaded with rain, his hat held awkwardly in both hands, his eyes moving quickly between Holmes and Watson, as if unsure where to direct his plea. He is of average height, but carries himself with the slight stoop of someone accustomed to moving through crowded streets, perhaps a shopkeeper or clerk, someone who knows London's working neighbourhoods intimately. "Mr. Holmes," he begins, his voice rough with emotion barely contained. "My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I have come because I do not know where else to turn. The police, they listen politely, but I can see they think me mad, or at least given to panic over nothing. But it is not nothing, sir. It is not nothing at all." He pauses, swallowing hard, and Holmes gestures gently toward the chair opposite Watson's, the one usually reserved for clients. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, sit down," Holmes says, his voice taking on that particular quality of calm authority that Watson has heard him use with distressed clients before, a tone that promises competence and attention and the possibility of solutions. "Mrs. Hudson will bring fresh tea in a moment. Take your time, gather your thoughts, and tell us what has brought you out on such an unpleasant evening." Whitmore sinks into the chair as if his legs can no longer quite support him. He sets his hat on his knees, gripping it with both hands, and for a moment simply stares into the fire, collecting himself. Watson leans forward slightly, his medical instincts engaged, noting the man's pale complexion the slight tremor in his hands, the rapid breathing that speaks of genuine fear rather than mere anxiety. This is a man who has seen or heard something that has shaken him to his core. "I live in Whitechapel, Mr. Holmes." Whitmore begins finally, his eyes still on the flames. "I run a small bookshop on Greenfield Street, have done for 15 years. It is not a wealthy area, as you know, but it is my home, and the people there are good people, hard-working, doing their best to raise their children properly despite the challenges. And that is what I have come about, you see, the children." His voice breaks slightly on the last word, and he pauses again, breathing deeply. Holmes sits perfectly still, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his grey eyes fixed on Whitmore with absolute attention. The fire crackles softly. The rain continues its gentle percussion against the windows. The clock ticks steadily onward, marking moments that feel suspended somehow, held in the warm amber light of the sitting room, while outside the December darkness deepens. 3 children have vanished in the past week, Whitmore continues, his voice steadying with the telling, as if sharing the burden makes it slightly more bearable. The first was Emily Marsh, 8 years old, disappeared on the evening of December 10th. She was walking home from her grandmother's house, a journey of only 3 streets, a route she had taken dozens of times. She never arrived home. The second was William Finch, 10 years old, vanished 2 days later from the market square in broad daylight. His mother looked away for just a moment, and when she looked back, he was gone. And then yesterday, little Sarah Brennan, only 6 years old, disappeared from her own back garden while her father was working in the house not 20 feet away. Watson feels his heart constrict at the recitation. As a doctor, as a man who has seen the worst that humanity can inflict, he knows how these stories usually end, and the thought of children caught in such circumstances fills him with cold dread. But Holmes's expression remains thoughtful, rather than distressed, his mind already working through the details, seeking patterns, examining possibilities. "The police have searched, of course," Whitmore says, his words coming faster now, as if he needs to get them all out before courage fails him. "They have questioned neighbours, searched the obvious places, the riverbanks, the warehouses, all the grim locations one thinks of in such cases. But they have found nothing. No witnesses, no trace, no evidence at all. It is as if the children simply vanished into air, as if something supernatural reached down and plucked them from the streets." He pauses, and when he speaks again, his voice drops to almost a whisper. "And then there are the stories, the legend, Krampus. The name hangs in the warm air of the sitting room like something foreign, something that does not quite belong in this rational space of books and science and logical deduction." Watson frowns slightly, searching his memory. The name is familiar somehow, connected to Germanic folklore perhaps, something he read once in passing, but never gave much thought to. Holmes's eyebrows rise slightly, the only indication of surprise. "Krampus," he repeats thoughtfully, "the companion of St. Nicholas in Alpine and Germanic Christmas traditions, a creature said to punish naughty children while Nicholas rewards the good. Quite a different figure from our English Father Christmas." His tone is neutral, scholarly, giving no indication of whether he places any credence in such folklore. And what connection do the people of Whitechapel make between this legendary creature and the disappearances, Mr. Whitmore? Whitmore shifts in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with how his story might sound to these educated men in their comfortable Baker Street rooms. There have been sightings, he says slowly. Or at least, people claim there have been. Several residents reported seeing a large figure in the fog near where Emily disappeared. Something that moved strangely, they said, not quite like a man. And at the market where William vanished, a costermonger swore he heard the sound of bells, heavy bells like cattle might wear, just before the boy's mother began screaming for her son, the sound of chains dragging on cobblestones. And worst of all, 2 days ago, a chimney sweep found something in an alley near Sarah's home. He reaches into his coat pocket and withdraws something wrapped in cloth, which he unfolds with trembling fingers to reveal a small bundle of twigs bound together with dark cord. The twigs are birch, Watson notes with his eye for natural detail, stripped of leaves and bark in places, formed into a crude bundle perhaps 8 inches long. There is something unpleasant about the object, something that speaks of deliberate construction for an unpleasant purpose. This was lying in the alley, Whitmore says, holding it out toward Holmes. The old stories say that Krampus carries such bundles, birch switches, to beat naughty children, and there were marks in the mud nearby, footprints that were wrong somehow, too large, with marks suggesting claws rather than boot soles. Holmes rises smoothly from his chair and takes the bundle, examining it closely in the firelight, turning it over in his long fingers, bringing it close to his face to study the cord binding. The room falls silent except for the eternal rain and fire, and Watson watches his friend's face, seeing the familiar signs of that extraordinary mind processing information, cataloguing details, forming hypotheses. Finally, Holmes sets the bundle on the side table and returns to his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me, Mr. Whitmore," Holmes says gently, "had any of these 3 children been particularly difficult lately? Any behavioral problems noted by parents or teachers? Any reason the community might have considered them troublesome or deserving of punishment?" The question clearly surprises Whitmore. "Why, yes," he says slowly. Emily had been caught stealing sweets from the corner shop twice in the past month. William had gotten into several fights with other boys, quite vicious ones, according to his teacher. And Sarah, poor little Sarah, had a terrible temper, screaming fits that disturbed the entire building where she lived. Her parents were at their wits' end with her. But these are children, Mr. Holmes, just children being children. Surely they do not deserve... His voice trails off, unable to complete the terrible thought. "Of course not," Holmes says firmly. "No child deserves to vanish, regardless of their behavior. But the connection is interesting, you must admit. Someone appears to be specifically targeting children who have exhibited problematic behavior, which suggests either a twisted sense of moral justice or someone deliberately cultivating the Krampus legend for their own purposes." He leans back in his chair, his fingers once more forming that characteristic steeple. The question becomes, why? What purpose would such abductions serve? And perhaps more pressingly, where are the children now? The fire pops loudly, sending a small shower of embers against the grate, and Watson reaches for the poker to adjust the logs, needing movement to dispel the growing chill that seems to have crept into the room despite the roaring flames. Outside, the rain intensifies slightly, drumming a more insistent rhythm against the glass, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour, its deep voice muffled by weather and darkness. Part 2. Holmes rises from his chair with fluid grace, moving to the window where he draws back the curtain slightly to gaze down at Baker Street below. The rain falls steadily now, creating rivers along the gutters, and the few pedestrians still abroad hurry past with heads bowed, their umbrellas glistening under the gas lamps. Watson watches his friend's silhouette against the faint light from outside, recognizing the posture of deep concentration, the way Holmes's mind works through problems, like a master chess player considering moves several turns ahead. The doctor can almost see the wheels turning, the vast catalogue of knowledge being searched, patterns being recognized or dismissed, possibilities being weighed against probability. Whitechapel, Holmes murmurs, almost to himself, his breath creating a small patch of fog on the cold glass. Always Whitechapel. That district seems to draw darkness to itself, like a lodestone attracts iron filings. The Ripper's hunting ground not 4 years past, and now this. He turns back to face Whitmore, his expression intense but not unkind. You mentioned that the police think you mad or prone to panic. I assume they have dismissed the Krampus theory entirely. Whitmore nods miserably, his hands still clutching his hat, as though it were a lifeline. Inspector Bradstreet listened politely enough, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He suggested that the children might have simply run away, that perhaps conditions in their homes were not ideal, that Whitechapel children sometimes vanish into the warrens of London for their own reasons. He promised to continue searching, but I could tell he thought me a superstitious fool for even mentioning the legend. The man's voice carries a note of desperation now, a plea for belief that goes beyond the simple facts of the case. But Mr. Holmes, I have lived in that neighborhood my entire life. I know those streets, those people. Something evil is at work there. I can feel it in my bones. Watson sets down his teacup carefully, the china making a soft sound against the saucer. Mr. Whitmore, he says gently, bringing his medical training to bear on the situation. You are clearly exhausted and deeply worried. These are terrible circumstances, and your concern for the children does you credit. But we must try to think clearly, to separate fact from fear. He glances at Holmes, seeking confirmation that his words are helpful rather than dismissive. My friend here has solved cases that seemed impossible, that appeared to have supernatural explanations, until reason revealed the human agency behind them. If there are children in danger, we will find them, but we must proceed methodically. Holmes nods approvingly at Watson's words and moves back to his chair, settling into it with his characteristic economy of motion. Watson is quite right, of course. However, I do not dismiss your instincts, Mr. Whitmore. A man who has lived 15 years in a neighborhood develops a sense for when something is genuinely amiss, when the normal rhythm of a place has been disrupted. Tell me more about these sightings, these glimpses of figures in fog. Were they all at night? Was the weather consistently poor, conducive to limited visibility? Whitmore leans forward eagerly, grateful to be taken seriously. Yes, always in the evening after dark, and always when the fog was thick. You know how it gets in Whitechapel, Mr. Holmes. The way the smoke from the factories and the river mist combine to create a fog so dense you cannot see your hand before your face. The figure was seen 3 times in total, always at a distance, always moving away from the witness. Once near the docks, once in an alley off Hanbury Street, and once near Christchurch on Commercial Street. Each time, The witness described something large, perhaps 7 feet tall, moving with an odd gait, sometimes seeming to have horns or antlers protruding from its head. Horns, Holmes repeats thoughtfully, his eyes distant. Krampus is traditionally depicted with horns, hooves, and a long tongue, carrying chains and a bundle of birch switches for punishment, sometimes accompanied by a large sack or basket for carrying away particularly naughty children. The imagery is quite specific, drawn from Alpine folklore, where the creature was said to be the dark counterpart to St. Nicholas, representing the fear and discipline aspect of the Christmas season. He pauses, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. It would not be difficult for someone with knowledge of the legend and access to appropriate materials to create a costume that would be terrifying in the fog, particularly to the superstitious, or those already predisposed to believe in such things. Mrs. Hudson appears at the door bearing a fresh pot of tea and an additional cup, moving with that quiet efficiency Watson has always admired. She sets the tray down on the table, her eyes flickering with concern toward their visitor, and Holmes thanks her with a small nod before she withdraws, closing the door softly behind her. The ritual of pouring tea creates a brief interlude of domesticity. The gentle splash of liquid into porcelain, the delicate clink of spoon against cup, the rising steam carrying the comforting aroma of bergamot and black tea leaves. Watson performs the service, preparing each cup with practiced ease, and hands one to Whitmore, who accepts it with trembling hands and drinks deeply, as if the warmth and normalcy might restore something that fear has stolen. The rain outside shifts again, becoming softer, more of a mist than a downpour, wrapping around the building like a blanket of sound. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The fire continues its endless dance, shadows leaping and retreating across the walls, across the faces of the 3 men gathered in this warm sanctuary above the sleeping city. Watson finds himself thinking about the missing children, wondering if they are warm tonight, if they are frightened, if they are even still alive. The thought sends a chill through him despite the fire's heat, and he pushes it away, focusing instead on Holmes, on the methodical brilliance that has solved so many seemingly impossible cases. The birch bundle, Watson says, breaking the contemplative silence. Could it not simply be coincidental? Birch twigs bound with cord could have been dropped by any tradesman or vendor. Holmes shakes his head slightly, reaching for the bundle and holding it up to catch the light. Observe the binding, Watson. This is not the casual work of someone bundling kindling for sale. The cord is knotted in a very specific pattern, a decorative pattern that serves no functional purpose for simple firewood. And see here, he points to several of the twigs. These have been deliberately scored with what appears to be a knife blade, creating a pattern of marks that would make the switches more painful if used for their intended purpose. This was made by someone who understands the traditional construction of such implements, who has studied the folklore carefully enough to reproduce details that would not be known to a casual observer. Whitmore sets down his teacup with a sharp click, his composure finally breaking. Then it is real. Someone is truly acting out this terrible legend, taking children to punish them according to some ancient, barbaric custom. His voice rises slightly, and Watson can see the man is near the edge of his emotional reserves, the accumulated stress of the past week threatening to overwhelm him entirely. Someone is certainly creating that appearance. Holmes says carefully, his voice calm and steady, a verbal anchor for the distressed man before him. Whether they believe in the legend themselves, or are simply using it as a cover for more mundane criminal activity, remains to be determined. But yes, Mr. Whitmore, I believe your concerns are entirely justified. Someone in Whitechapel is abducting children, and they are going to considerable lengths to make it appear as though a folkloric entity is responsible. He sets down the bundle and leans forward, his grey eyes intense with purpose. Which brings us to the most important question. Why announce themselves so dramatically? Why leave clues, create sightings, build this theatrical presentation? Most criminals who abduct children do so quietly, leaving as little evidence as possible. But our Krampus wants to be seen, wants to be known, wants people to believe in the legend. Watson feels his pulse quicken slightly with the familiar excitement that comes when a case truly engages Holmes's formidable intellect. He has seen this transformation many times before. The shift from contemplative stillness to focused energy, the hunting instinct awakening in his friend's brilliant but restless mind. Perhaps it is a form of social commentary, Watson suggests, thinking aloud. Someone who believes that modern parents are too lenient, that children need harsher discipline, and who has taken it upon themselves to provide that discipline through terror and abduction. An interesting theory, Holmes acknowledges, though his tone suggests he is considering multiple possibilities simultaneously. Or perhaps someone with a more practical motive, who has discovered that this particular method serves to keep potential witnesses silent. A community gripped by superstitious fear is less likely to observe carefully, less likely to report what they see for fear of being thought mad, or of attracting the creature's attention to their own children. Fear is a remarkably effective tool for creating blind spots in human observation. The clock on the mantel chimes the half-hour, its melodious notes falling into the warm air like drops of water into a still pond. Watson realizes, with some surprise, that they have been talking for over an hour, that the night has deepened around them, while they sat in this illuminated bubble of rationality and tea and slowly unraveling mystery. He stretches slightly in his chair, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles that have been still too long, and catches Holmes watching him with that slight smile that indicates his friend has noticed his discomfort, but finds it somehow endearing. "Mr. Whitmore," Holmes says, rising from his chair with decision, "I will take your case. Watson and I will travel to Whitechapel tomorrow morning to begin our investigation. We will examine the locations where the children disappeared, speak with witnesses, and attempt to discover where your Krampus might be hiding between performances. However, I must ask you to do something that may prove difficult." He pauses, ensuring he has the man's full attention. "You must tell no one that you have consulted me. If word spreads that Sherlock Holmes is investigating, our quarry may go to ground, and we will lose our chance to recover the children while they may still be alive. Can you keep this secret?" Whitmore rises as well, some of the weight seeming to lift from his shoulders, now that he has secured Holmes's assistance. "Of course, Mr. Holmes, I will say nothing to anyone. I only want the children found, brought home safely to their families. Whatever you need from me, you have only to ask." He retrieves his hat, preparing to depart, but hesitates at the door. "There is one more thing, perhaps nothing, but it has been troubling me. Several of the shop owners near where Emily disappeared reported hearing music in the fog that night, very faint. like bells or chimes playing some kind of tune. They could not identify the melody, but they all said it made them feel uneasy, made them want to close their shops early and go home. One woman said it reminded her of a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, but slower, sadder, as if the song itself were mourning something. Holmes's eyes narrow slightly, and Watson can see new calculations being made, new connections being drawn in that vast internal map of information his friend maintains. Music, Holmes murmurs. How very interesting. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, that detail is potentially quite significant. Thank you for mentioning it. He escorts their visitor to the door, shaking his hand firmly. Go home now. Try to rest. We will send word as soon as we have learned anything of substance. And remember, say nothing of our involvement. After Whitmore has descended the stairs, and the sound of the front door closing echoes faintly up to them, Holmes returns to stand before the fire, his back to Watson, his posture once more that of intense concentration. The room feels larger somehow, with their visitor gone, the shadows deeper, the silence more complete, despite the continuing rain and the fire's voice. Watson remains in his chair, knowing that his friend is processing everything they have heard, organizing it into that remarkable filing system of a mind that can hold and cross-reference seemingly infinite amounts of information. What are you thinking, Holmes? Watson asks finally, when the silence has stretched for several minutes. Holmes turns, and there is something in his expression that Watson cannot quite read, a mixture of interest and concern, and something else, something that might be anger at the cruelty of whoever is perpetrating these crimes against children. I am thinking, Watson, that we are dealing with someone quite clever, quite theatrical, and quite possibly quite mad in the way that makes them most dangerous. They understand psychology, folklore, the power of fear and legend. They know how to move through Whitechapel unseen despite their dramatic appearances, and they are escalating, taking children more frequently, growing bolder. He picks up the birch bundle again, studying it in the firelight. But they have also made mistakes, left evidence, created a pattern that can be studied and potentially predicted. Tomorrow we will visit Whitechapel, and we will begin to unravel this particular mystery before another child vanishes into the December fog. Part 3 morning arrives with reluctance over London, the sun nothing more than a pale suggestion behind layers of winter cloud that seem to press down upon the city like a heavy quilt. Watson wakes to the sound of carriages already moving through Baker Street, the everyday commerce of the city resuming its eternal rhythm despite rain and fog and the mysteries that lurk in shadowed districts. He dresses with the care of long habit, selecting practical clothing suitable for a day of investigation in less salubrious neighbourhoods, and descends to find Holmes already at the breakfast table, 3 newspapers spread before him, his eyes scanning columns with that rapid precision that allows him to absorb vast amounts of information in moments. Mrs. Hudson has laid out a proper breakfast despite the early hour. Toast and marmalade, kippers, eggs prepared just as Watson prefers them, strong coffee sending its rich aroma through the sitting room. Holmes has barely touched his plate, Watson notes with familiar exasperation, but the coffee pot beside him is nearly empty, suggesting his friend has been awake and reading for some time already. The fire has been rebuilt, crackling cheerfully against the grey morning, and the room feels like a sanctuary, a place of warmth and reason, before they venture out into the cold uncertainty of investigation. "Good morning, Watson," Holmes says, without looking up from his paper. "I trust you slept well. I have been reviewing accounts of unusual occurrences in the East End over the past month. Nothing that mentions Krampus specifically, but there have been several reports of vagrant individuals behaving strangely near Whitechapel, descriptions that might fit someone preparing for the role they are now playing. A man seen collecting birch branches from Regent's Park 3 weeks ago. Another reported to be sketching the exteriors of various houses in the district where the children lived, always at dusk, always hurrying away when approached. Watson settles into his chair and begins preparing his breakfast, the familiar domestic ritual helping to center his thoughts. "Do the police connect these observations to the disappearances?" he asks, spreading marmalade across warm toast, watching it melt into the porous bread. "They do not appear to," Holmes replies, finally setting aside his newspaper and reaching for his coffee cup. The reports were filed by different constables in different divisions, never collated or analysed as potentially related incidents. This is the perpetual weakness of Scotland Yard, Watson, the failure to see patterns that emerge only when seemingly unconnected data points are viewed together. One constable sees a man gathering branches and thinks nothing of it, beyond perhaps firewood collection. Another sees someone sketching buildings and assumes an artist at work. But when you place these observations alongside birch bundles left as calling cards and children taken from carefully observed locations, a different picture emerges entirely. The daylight, such as it is, grows slightly stronger beyond the windows, though the sky remains uniformly grey, promising more rain before evening. Watson eats methodically, knowing from experience that investigations can lead to missed meals and long hours without sustenance, and watches his friend's profile against the window light, seeing the sharp focus that has settled over Holmes's features. This is the Holmes that criminals fear, Watson thinks, the relentless mind that never stops working, never stops connecting threads that others cannot even perceive as separate strands of the same cloth. They depart Baker Street shortly after 9 o'clock, wrapped in heavy coats and mufflers against the biting wind that has replaced the rain, carrying Holmes's walking stick and Watson's medical bag, which he brings from habit despite this being an investigative rather than medical call. The hansom cab that carries them east moves through streets that grow progressively narrower, more crowded, buildings pressing closer together as if seeking warmth from shared walls. The character of London changes block by block, the elegant facades of the West End giving way to the working vitality of the East, shops displaying goods of diminishing quality, pedestrians dressed in increasingly threadbare clothing, the whole district carrying that particular air of determined survival that Watson has always associated with Whitechapel. Holmes sits forward on the cab seat, his eyes scanning everything they pass with the attention of a naturalist observing a complex ecosystem. Watson knows his friend sees things invisible to ordinary perception, reads meaning in the angle of a shop sign, the condition of pavement, the way people move through streets, all the tiny details that build into a comprehensive understanding of a place and its rhythms. They pass Christ Church with its distinctive spire reaching toward the grey sky, and Holmes points it out as one of the locations where the creature had been glimpsed, his voice barely audible over the rattle of wheels on cobblestones. The cab deposits them on Commercial Street, and they stand for a moment, orienting themselves, while the vehicle clatters away in search of other fares. The street is busy despite the cold, costume owners calling their wares, women with baskets hurrying between shops, children darting through the crowds with the fearless agility of those raised in such environments. Watson finds himself studying the children with new attention, wondering which of them might be deemed naughty by some twisted moral calculus, which might be at risk from whatever predator stalks these streets disguised as legendary monster. The Whitmore bookshop is 2 streets over, Holmes says, consulting a small notebook he has drawn from his pocket. But I thought we might begin with the location where Emily Marsh disappeared. According to the police report, which I reviewed at Scotland Yard last night, while you were sleeping, she was walking along Greenfield Street toward her home on Fashion Street, a distance of perhaps 300 yards. She was last seen by a neighbour who watched her pass the corner of Commercial Street, and then returned to her own affairs. When Emily did not arrive home within the expected time, her parents began searching, and within an hour had alerted the police. They walked together through streets Watson knows primarily from his medical practice, places where he has treated patients too poor to afford proper physicians, families living in conditions that make illness nearly inevitable. The East End has always stirred mixed emotions in him: admiration for the resilience of its residents, combined with anger at the societal structures that confine good people to such desperate circumstances. Holmes, he knows, sees it differently, views it as an endless source of human nature in its most raw and unadorned forms, a laboratory for studying behavior and motive, and the thin lines that separate order from chaos. Greenfield Street is quieter than Commercial, lined with small shops and narrow residences, washing hanging between buildings despite the cold, creating a canopy of damp fabric overhead. Holmes stops at the corner where Emily was last observed, standing perfectly still while his eyes map every detail of the surroundings. Watson has learned not to interrupt these moments of intense observation, understands that his friend is cataloguing everything, building a mental reconstruction of the scene as it would have appeared on the evening of December 10th. It was foggy that night, Holmes murmurs, visibility severely limited. The street lamps would have been mere halos of light, creating pools of illumination separated by deep shadow. Emily was 8 years old, small for her age according to the description, wearing a dark coat that would have made her difficult to see in the fog. Someone waiting here. He moves to a recessed doorway, 20 paces along the street, would have been completely invisible to anyone passing by, even someone looking directly at this spot. And see here, Watson, the pavement is uneven, creating a natural hollow where water collects. On a foggy night with recent rain, this section would have been particularly dark and wet. Watson joins him in the doorway, trying to see what Holmes sees, to understand the geometry of abduction. So, someone could have simply reached out and pulled her into this space, muffled any cry, and then what? Carried her away. Surely someone would have noticed a man carrying a struggling child. Not if the child was unconscious, Holmes says grimly. Chloroform applied with reasonable skill can render someone insensible in seconds. And not a man carrying a child, Watson, but perhaps a tradesman with a cart. Someone whose presence on these streets would be unremarkable, whose vehicle would provide concealment for small cargo. Or perhaps he kneels, examining the pavement closely. Someone who used the underground See these marks? This is a coal hole cover, access to the basement of the building above. Many of these older structures have interconnected cellars, remnants of older buildings that once stood here, creating a network of passages beneath Whitechapel that few people remember exist. The thought sends a chill through Watson that has nothing to do with the December cold. The idea of someone moving beneath the streets, emerging to snatch children, and then disappearing back into subterranean darkness is deeply unsettling. He looks at the buildings surrounding them with new awareness, thinking of what might lie beneath the ordinary surfaces. What forgotten spaces might harbour something monstrous. Holmes rises, brushing dust from his knees, and they continue along the route Emily should have taken. He stops every few yards, examining walls for marks, peering into alleys, occasionally producing his magnifying glass to study some detail invisible to Watson's eyes. They attract curious glances from residents, and Watson is aware of being watched from windows, of conversations stopping as they pass. The natural suspicion of strangers that characterizes communities where outsiders usually mean trouble of some kind. At a small courtyard where 3 alleys intersect, Holmes stops again, his attention caught by something on the ground near a drainage grate. He crouches, and Watson sees him carefully extract something from between the iron bars, holding it up to catch what little light filters through the overcast sky. It is a small bell, tarnished silver, the kind that might be sewn onto clothing or harness for decoration or identification. Holmes cups it in his palm and gives it a gentle shake, producing a clear, sweet tone that seems incongruous in this grey industrial landscape. Music, Holmes says softly, echoing Whitmore's words from the previous evening. Bells in the fog. Krampus is traditionally depicted wearing bells. Watson, the sound meant to announce his presence, to create fear before he even appears. Someone is being very thorough in their recreation of the legend. He wraps the bell carefully in his handkerchief and tucks it into his coat pocket. This was not dropped accidentally. It was left here deliberately, another piece of the theatrical performance, another detail to build the myth. They spend another hour exploring the immediate area, Holmes questioning several shopkeepers with a casual manner that puts them at ease, presenting himself as a journalist researching East End Christmas traditions, rather than a detective investigating child abduction. Watson admires the performance, the way his friend adapts his speech and manner to match his audience, drawing out information through apparent sympathy and shared interest rather than interrogation. An old woman selling flowers remembers the fog that night, describes it as hungry fog, the kind that swallows souls, and mentions seeing shadows moving against shadows, something large that made no sound despite its size. A butcher recalls his dog refusing to leave the shop that evening, cowering in the corner and whimpering, behaviour he had never seen from the usually fearless animal. By the time they make their way to Whitmore's bookshop, Watson's feet are cold, and his stomach is reminding him that breakfast was hours ago. The shop is narrow but deep, shelves reaching toward a ceiling, brown with years of coal smoke and tobacco. Books crammed into every available space, in that wonderful chaos that characterizes establishments, run by people who love their inventory more than profit. The smell is glorious, that distinctive aroma of old paper and leather binding and printer's ink, and Watson finds himself relaxing slightly, despite the grim purpose of their visit. Thomas Whitmore emerges from behind a curtain at the rear of the shop, his face showing relief. at seeing them. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank God you have come. I was beginning to fear I had dreamed your promise to help, that it was too much to hope for." He glances toward the shop windows, checking for observers, then gestures toward the back room. "Please, come through where we can speak privately. I have tea prepared, and I think you will want to hear what happened last night." Part 4. The back room of Whitmore's bookshop proves to be a cramped but comfortable space, walls lined with volumes that appear to be personal favourites rather than stock for sale, a small coal stove radiating welcome heat, and 2 worn armchairs positioned near a table scattered with papers and ledgers. A narrow window overlooks a courtyard where pigeons pick at scattered seed, their soft cooing creating a gentle background rhythm. Whitmore busies himself with the tea, his hands steadier than they were the previous evening, though Watson can see the strain still etched around his eyes, the weight of worry that comes from caring deeply about matters beyond one's control. Holmes settles into one of the chairs with the boneless grace of a cat, his long legs stretched toward the stove, his fingers already steepled in that characteristic pose of concentrated listening. Watson takes the other chair gratefully, feeling the cold of the morning beginning to seep from his bones as warmth surrounds him. Outside, the grey day continues its slow progression, clouds moving ponderously overhead, like great ships navigating an invisible sea. "What happened last night?" Holmes asks without preamble, accepting the teacup Whitmore offers and cradling it between his palms. "Another disappearance?" Whitmore shakes his head, relief and anxiety warring in his expression. "No, thank God, no child was taken. But there was another sighting, and this time with multiple witnesses who cannot all be dismissed as superstitious or imaginative. Just after 10 o'clock, near the market square on Commercial Street, at least 6 people saw the creature. He sits heavily on a wooden stool, as if his legs no longer quite support him. I was not among them, but I spoke with 3 of the witnesses this morning, and their accounts are remarkably consistent. A figure, perhaps 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur or hair, with what appeared to be horns or antlers rising from its head. It moved through the fog with a strange, loping gait, and it carried something over its shoulder, a large sack or bundle of some kind. Watson feels his heart constrict. Another child? They could not tell, Whitmore says miserably. The fog was thick, visibility poor, and the creature was there and gone in moments. Several witnesses reported hearing bells and chains, exactly as the legend describes. One man, a dock worker with no patience for superstition, tried to follow the figure, but it vanished into an alley near the railway arches. And when he reached the spot seconds later, there was nothing, no trace of anything having passed that way at all. Holmes's eyes have taken on that distant quality that Watson recognizes as intense thought, his mind processing this new information against everything they learned during the morning's investigation. This dock worker, what is his name? I should like to speak with him. Jacob Marley, Whitmore provides, and despite the grimness of their discussion, Watson cannot suppress a slight smile at the Dickensian coincidence of the name. He lives on Thrall Street, works the docks on the Thames most days. He is a practical man, Mr. Holmes, not given to flights of fancy. If he says he saw something, then he saw something. I do not doubt that he saw something, Holmes replies carefully. The question remains what exactly that something was, and whether its appearance last night represents an escalation or simply another performance in our mysterious director's ongoing theatrical production. The timing is interesting, however. 3 children taken over the course of a week, and now a highly visible sighting with multiple witnesses but no abduction. That suggests either a change in pattern or perhaps a deliberate attempt to maintain public fear while planning the next move. Watson sips his tea, finding comfort in its warmth and the familiar ritual of the act. Through the window, he watches the pigeons continue their endless search for sustenance, their small lives uncomplicated by mysteries and human cruelty. Could it be, he ventures, thinking aloud, that the creature showed itself without taking a child because it knew it was being hunted? If word has spread that questions are being asked, that the disappearances are being investigated more seriously, perhaps whoever is behind this wanted to assert their presence, to demonstrate that they can still operate with impunity despite scrutiny. An excellent observation, Watson, Holmes says, with genuine approval. The psychology of the exhibitionist criminal, the individual who craves not merely the commission of crimes, but the recognition and fear they generate. Such personalities often escalate when they feel their work is not receiving adequate attention, or conversely, when they sense pursuit and wish to demonstrate their superiority over their hunters. He turns his attention back to Whitmore. Has there been any increase in police presence in Whitechapel since the children disappeared? Whitmore considers this. Some, yes. More constables walking beats, particularly in the evenings. Inspector Bradstreet has been seen speaking with community leaders, asking questions. Nothing dramatic, but certainly more visible law enforcement than is typical for our district. His expression grows troubled. Do you think the police presence might actually be making things worse, driving this creature to act more boldly rather than deterring it? Possibly, Holmes acknowledges, though I suspect our Krampus would have escalated regardless. The pattern suggests someone building toward something, each disappearance and sighting carefully orchestrated to increase fear and establish the legend more firmly in the community consciousness. The question that troubles me most is why? What is the ultimate goal? If this were simply about harming children, there are far less elaborate methods available. The theatrical elements, the careful cultivation of the folkloric connection, the deliberate leaving of evidence, all of this requires significant effort and planning. There must be a purpose beyond the immediate crimes. The coal stove ticks softly as metal expands with heat, and somewhere in the shop beyond the curtain, a clock marks the passage of time with steady precision. Watson finds himself thinking about the 3 missing children, wondering where they are at this moment, whether they are together or separated, frightened, or perhaps mercifully unconscious of their circumstances. The thought of children in distress has always affected him deeply, touching something fundamental in his nature that combines his medical oath to protect life with his soldier's instinct to defend the vulnerable. Holmes rises suddenly, that quick, decisive movement that signals a change in approach. I should like to examine the location of last night's sighting immediately, while any physical evidence remains undisturbed. Mr. Whitmore, can you direct us to the specific spot where this Jacob Marley lost sight of the creature? Whitmore stands as well, reaching for his coat. I will take you there myself. The location is not far, perhaps a 10-minute walk, near the railway arches on Chicksand Street. The area is somewhat isolated, particularly at night. Fewer residents and mostly warehouse spaces that are empty after business hours. They emerge from the bookshop into a day that has grown somehow greyer, the clouds lower and more oppressive, promising rain before evening. The streets are still busy with the midday commerce of working London, but Watson notices a change in the atmosphere from their earlier exploration. A tension in the way people move and speak. Mothers keeping children closer. Conversation stopping as strangers pass. Fear is settling over Whitechapel like an invisible fog, he realizes, changing the character of the district in subtle but pervasive ways. The walk takes them through progressively less inhabited streets, the shops giving way to warehouses and small manufactories, buildings whose windows stare blankly at the pavement, their interiors dark even in daylight. The sound of the city becomes muffled here. The usual cacophony of voices and wheels and commerce replaced by a peculiar emptiness that feels unnatural in such a crowded district. Holmes walks slightly ahead, his eyes constantly moving, cataloguing everything, and Watson can see the hunting instinct fully engaged now. His friend transformed into that focused predator of criminals that has brought so many malefactors to justice. The railway arches loom ahead, massive brick structures that carry trains overhead, creating a series of tunnels and recesses beneath the tracks where businesses store goods or vagrants seek shelter from weather. The space has that particular quality of urban areas that exist in functional limbo, neither properly inhabited nor completely abandoned, places where the ordinary rules of society seem somehow suspended. Holmes stops at the entrance to one of the arches, his head tilted slightly as he absorbs the geography of the location. This is where Marley lost sight of the figure, he asks Whitmore, who nods confirmation. Interesting choice. Multiple exit routes, poor visibility even in good weather, and the sound of passing trains overhead would mask any noise made during an abduction or escape. Watson, observe the ground here. What do you see? Watson crouches, examining the damp earth and scattered debris that carpets the area beneath the arch. At first, he sees only the expected detritus of such places: broken glass, scraps of paper, the odd rotting vegetable from some dropped load. But then his eyes begin to discern patterns, disturbances in the dirt that might be footprints, though badly degraded by morning rain. Marks, he says slowly, though whether from last night or previous activity, I cannot determine with certainty. Holmes joins him, producing his magnifying glass and conducting a methodical examination of the ground, occasionally using a small trowel from his pocket to gently move aside debris or scrape at the earth. Watson watches his friend work with the patient precision of a surgeon, missing nothing, considering everything, and feels that familiar admiration for the extraordinary mind that can extract meaning from what appears to ordinary observation as meaningless chaos. Here, Holmes says finally, pointing to a section of ground near the wall where the earth is less disturbed. These marks are fresh, made last night, during or shortly after the rain stopped. See how the edges are still relatively sharp, not yet degraded by foot traffic or weathering. And the depth suggests something heavy, certainly heavy enough to be a person of substantial size or someone carrying significant weight. He moves his glass slowly along a trail of such impressions, following them deeper into the arch until they disappear, where the ground becomes paved with old stones. Whitmore hovers anxiously at the entrance, clearly uncomfortable in this shadowed space. Marley said the creature simply vanished, as if it melted into the darkness. He searched for several minutes, but found nothing, no trace of where it might have gone. Not quite nothing. Holmes corrects gently and holds up something he has extracted from a gap between two stones. It is a tuft of dark hair or fur, coarse and long, perhaps 2 inches in length. He examines it closely, sniffing it carefully, then wrapping it in another handkerchief. Horsehair, he pronounces, dyed dark brown or black, and recently. This is not naturally occurring animal fur, but something prepared for costume or upholstery work. Our Krampus is shedding. Watson feels a surge of hope at this tangible evidence, proof that they are dealing with a human pretender rather than anything supernatural. Then, we are looking for someone with access to costume materials, theatrical suppliers perhaps, or upholsterers who work with horsehair. Precisely, Holmes agrees, moving further into the arch, his hands tracing the walls, examining the ceiling, searching for something Watson cannot yet perceive. The space smells of dampness and old smoke, and that indefinable scent of places long abandoned by regular human presence. A train passes overhead, the sudden thunder of it making them all start, vibrations shaking dust from ancient brickwork. And for a moment, conversation is impossible, the world reduced to overwhelming sound and trembling stone. When the train passes and relative quiet returns, Holmes has moved to the far end of the arch, where it opens onto another street. He stands looking out at the grey daylight beyond, his silhouette dark against the pale illumination. And Watson can see from his posture that some new understanding has crystallized. "Mr. Whitmore," Holmes calls back, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "I believe we need to expand our investigation in a specific direction. Tell me, are there any theatrical troupes currently performing in Whitechapel? Any music halls or entertainment venues that might employ actors, costume makers, people familiar with creating convincing disguises?" Part 5. Whitmore joins them at the far end of the arch, his footsteps echoing against brick walls that have absorbed decades of London soot and rain. He considers Holmes's question carefully, his brow furrowed with concentration, clearly wanting to provide accurate information rather than hasty speculation. The light from the street beyond illuminates his face in profile, showing the deep lines that worry has carved around his mouth and eyes, the physical manifestation of sleepless nights and desperate concern for missing children. "There is the Pavilion Theatre on Whitechapel Road," he says slowly, thinking through the geography of his neighbourhood. "They present melodramas mostly, occasional variety performances during the Christmas season, and the Lusby's Music Hall, though that caters to a rougher crowd, sailors and dock workers looking for entertainment after dark. Less respectable fare, if you take my meaning." He pauses, uncertain whether to continue. "There was also a travelling show that set up near the market 3 weeks ago, a small operation with puppets and some kind of mechanical theatre, but they moved on after only a few days. The crowds were not substantial enough to sustain them, I suppose." Holmes's interest sharpens visibly at this last detail. "A travelling show," he repeats thoughtfully. "Puppets and mechanical theatre. Do you recall anything specific about the operators of this entertainment? Their names, their appearance, the nature of their performances?" "I saw them only once, in passing," Whitmore admits. 2 men, I think, or perhaps 1 man and a woman, difficult to tell, as they wore heavy coats and scarves against the cold. The puppets were quite elaborate, I remember that much, larger than typical Punch and Judy figures, and the mechanical theatre involved some kind of shadow play with moving scenery. They played folk tales, I was told, old stories about creatures and transformations. Children seemed fascinated by it, though several mothers I spoke with found the presentations somewhat disturbing, too dark for young minds. Watson sees Holmes's expression shift into that focused intensity that indicates pieces falling into place, connections forming in that remarkable mind. Folk tales about creatures, Holmes murmurs, dark stories that disturb mothers but fascinate children. And they departed, just as our Krampus began making appearances. Mr. Whitmore, this may be the thread we need to pull. Do you know anyone who might remember more details about this travelling show? Where it was positioned exactly? Whether the operators spoke with locals, made any particular connections within the community? Whitmore's face shows dawning understanding, hope mixing with horror at the implications. Sarah Brennan's mother mentioned something about taking Sarah to see a puppet show shortly before the girl disappeared. She said Sarah had nightmares afterward, woke crying about monsters with horns. At the time, I thought nothing of it, just a child's overactive imagination responding to theatrical spectacle. But now, his voice trails off, the unspoken possibilities too terrible to articulate fully. Now we must consider that our puppeteers were studying their potential victims. Holmes completes the thought grimly, learning which children might be most susceptible to fear, which families might be most affected by disappearances, gathering intelligence while presenting themselves as innocent entertainers. It is quite brilliant in its way, quite thoroughly planned. He turns to Watson, his grey eyes sharp with purpose. We need to speak with the mothers of all 3 missing children, Watson. We need to know if Emily and William also attended these puppet shows, if there were any interactions between the performers and the families, any pattern that connects all 3 victims beyond their supposed naughtiness. They emerge from the railway arch into the grey afternoon, the temperature dropping noticeably as evening approaches, despite the hour still being relatively early. The winter sun, such as it is, has already begun its retreat toward the horizon, and Watson realizes with some unease that darkness will arrive within a few hours, bringing with it the fog and shadows that seem to be the Krampus's preferred hunting conditions. The thought of another child being taken tonight, while they are still gathering information and forming theories, sends a chill through him that has nothing to do with December weather. The walk to Emily Marsh's home takes them back through Commercial Street and into the narrow residential warrens where Whitechapel's working families live, packed together in buildings that seem to lean on each other for support. Laundry hangs motionless in the still cold air, and children play in courtyards under the watchful eyes of mothers who no longer let them wander beyond sight. The atmosphere has changed markedly since morning, Watson notes, fear manifesting now in careful vigilance, in shortened tethers, in the way people gather in groups rather than walking alone. Emily's mother receives them in a ground floor room that serves as kitchen, parlour and workroom combined, her hands never stopping their work with needle and thread even as she speaks, the need to earn pennies through piecework overriding even the etiquette of entertaining visitors. She is younger than Watson expected, perhaps 30, but grief and exhaustion have aged her face, hollowed her cheeks, given her eyes a haunted quality that he recognizes from too many bedsides where hope has worn thin. "I remember the puppet show," she says, in response to Holmes's gentle questioning, her voice flat, with the careful control of someone who has cried until no more tears will come. Emily begged to see it, and I thought, why not? A bit of entertainment costs nothing, and the girl had been so difficult lately, stealing sweets, lying about her whereabouts. I thought perhaps a treat would sweeten her disposition. Her hands pause in their work for just a moment, a tremor passing through them. The puppets performed a story about children who were bad, who were taken away by a monster to teach them lessons. Emily was terrified, but also fascinated, could not look away. Afterward, one of the performers spoke to her, asked her name, asked if she had been a good girl. Emily laughed and said no, said she was often naughty and did not care. The performer laughed too, but it was not a kind laugh. I should have recognized something wrong in it, should have pulled Emily away, but I thought nothing of it at the time. Holmes leans forward slightly, his voice infinitely gentle. This performer who spoke to Emily, can you describe them? Was it a man or woman? Any distinguishing features you recall? Mrs. Marsh's brow furrows with effort of memory. A man, I think, though his face was partially hidden by a scarf and hat. Tall, very tall, taller than most men I see on these streets. His voice was cultured, educated, not the rough speech of Whitechapel. He had gloves on, expensive leather gloves that seemed out of place with his otherwise shabby costume. And his eyes. She pauses, searching for words. His eyes were very pale, almost colourless, like looking at ice. They made me uncomfortable, though I could not say precisely why. Watson watches Holmes absorb this information, filing it away with everything else they have learned. Building what he knows will become a comprehensive profile of their quarry. The detail about the educated voice particularly interests Watson, suggesting someone who has deliberately descended into Whitechapel, rather than someone native to the district, an outsider playing a role among people he likely views as beneath him. They spend another quarter hour with Mrs. Marsh, Holmes drawing out every detail she can remember about the puppet show, its location, its timing, the other families who attended, the stories it presented. When they finally take their leave, pressing a few coins into her reluctant hand, with the insistence that it is payment for her valuable assistance, Watson sees tears finally break through her careful control. Silent tracks down her worn face that she wipes away quickly with the back of her hand, before returning to her needlework. Outside, the afternoon has progressed toward that peculiar winter twilight that seems neither day nor night, but something suspended between, the sky taking on a luminous quality that makes the buildings appear almost ethereal, edges softened by approaching darkness. Holmes walks quickly now, purpose driving him, and Watson must lengthen his stride to keep pace as they navigate through increasingly narrow lanes toward William Finch's residence. We are looking for a tall man with pale eyes, educated speech, and expensive tastes disguised beneath shabby costume, Holmes says as they walk, speaking rapidly, thinking aloud in the way he does when a case is crystallizing. Someone with knowledge of folklore and theatrical presentation, access to costume materials, and possibly mechanical skills for the puppet theatre. Someone who has studied this community carefully enough to identify vulnerable targets and plan elaborate abductions. And most importantly, Watson, someone who needs these children for a purpose beyond simple cruelty. The theatrical elements, the cultivation of the Krampus legend, these require too much effort to be merely incidental to the crimes. What purpose could possibly justify stealing children? Watson asks, though he fears he already knows some of the darker possibilities that human depravity makes imaginable. "That is precisely what we must determine," Holmes replies, his voice tight with controlled anger. "And we must determine it quickly, before whatever our Krampus is building toward reaches its culmination. I fear we are running out of time, Watson. The escalating appearances, the boldness of last night's sighting, these suggest someone approaching an endgame, a final act in whatever terrible drama is being staged. William Finch's family lives in slightly better circumstances than Emily's, occupying 2 rooms above a cobbler's shop, the smell of leather and polish permeating everything. William's father is a dock supervisor, a man whose broad shoulders and calloused hands speak of years of physical labour, and he receives them with barely contained frustration, the helpless rage of someone accustomed to solving problems through direct action, now faced with an enemy he cannot see or fight. "My boy went to that damned puppet show," he confirms when Holmes asks, his voice rough with emotion. "His mother took him, thought it would be educational, expose him to culture beyond these narrow streets." William came home speaking of monsters and punishments, fascinated and frightened in equal measure. He got into a fight at school the next day, bloodied another boy's nose quite badly. When I confronted him about it, he said the puppets taught him that bad children needed to be punished, and the other boy had been bad, had stolen William's pencil. It made no sense, but children that age rarely do. "Did William interact directly with the performers?" Holmes asks, and Finch nods. The tall one called him over after the show, gave him a small wooden figure as a gift, a carved demon or devil of some kind. William treasured it, carried it everywhere in the days before he vanished. When we searched his room afterward, the figure was gone, taken with him or by whoever took him. Holmes's eyes narrow at this detail, a gift that the child would treasure, would keep close. How very clever, and how very useful if one wanted to ensure a child's compliance. If one said, perhaps, that the demon in the carving would know if the child cried out or struggled, would punish such resistance. Fear is a powerful tool for ensuring cooperation, particularly in young minds, already primed through theatrical performance, to believe in such supernatural threats. The shadows outside the windows have deepened into true twilight now, gas lamps beginning to glow along the streets, shopkeepers lighting their displays against the gathering darkness. Watson feels the day slipping away from them, feels time becoming an enemy as potent as the mysterious Krampus they hunt. They still have Sarah Brennan's family to interview, still have the music halls and theatrical venues to investigate, still have Jacob Marley, the dock worker, to question. And night is settling over Whitechapel, like a predator preparing to hunt. Part 6. The Brennan family resides in conditions markedly worse than the other 2 households, occupying a single cramped room in a building that leans so severely, Watson half expects it to collapse as they climb the narrow staircase. The air is thick with the smells of too many people living in too little space, cooking odours and unwashed bodies, and the acrid tang of cheap coal burning in insufficient grates. Holmes navigates these spaces with the ease of long familiarity, his work having taken him into every stratum of London society, while Watson follows with the careful attention of someone who has treated patients in similar circumstances and knows the dangers lurking in rotting floorboards and crumbling walls. Sarah's father opens the door before they can knock, having heard their approach on stairs, that announce every visitor with groaning protests. He is younger than Watson expected, perhaps 25, with the gaunt frame of someone who goes hungry so that others might eat. His eyes carrying that desperate quality of the perpetually worried. Behind him, in the room's dim interior, lit by a single guttering candle, Watson can see a woman sitting motionless in a chair, staring at nothing, her stillness speaking of grief so profound it has paralyzed even the most basic engagement with life. "You are the detective," Brennan says without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whitmore told me you might come, though he said to tell no one. I have kept his confidence, but please, if you have any hope of finding Sarah, any hope at all, tell me what I must do." Holmes speaks softly, respectfully, understanding instinctively that this man is operating at the very edge of his emotional capacity. "We are making progress, Mr. Brennan. We have reason to believe the person responsible for Sarah's disappearance, for all 3 children's disappearances, is someone who operated a puppet show in this area several weeks ago. Did Sarah attend such a performance?" Brennan nods slowly, glancing back at his wife, who shows no sign of having heard the question. "I took her myself," he says, his voice cracking. "She had been having terrible tantrums, screaming fits that disturbed the entire building, made me fear we would be evicted. I thought perhaps the entertainment would calm her, give her something to focus on beyond her own frustrations. The puppets performed stories about children learning to behave, about consequences for wickedness." Sarah sat transfixed through the entire performance, barely breathing, her little hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. "Did she speak with the performers afterward?" Watson asks gently, seeing the man's distress and wanting to minimize the pain of recounting these memories. "The tall one approached us," Brennan confirms. "Asked Sarah if she had enjoyed the show, if she understood the lessons in the stories. Sarah said yes, but her voice was small, frightened in a way I had not heard before. The performer leaned down close to her and said something I could not quite hear. Something about good children sleeping safely, while naughty children received visits from those who teach proper behavior. Sarah began crying then, and I pulled her away, took her home. She had nightmares that night, woke screaming about horned creatures coming through windows. And then, 2 days later, she vanished from our own back garden while I was inside for mere moments." His composure finally breaks, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "I failed her. I brought her to that cursed show, exposed her to that monster's attention, and now she is gone." Holmes places a hand on the man's shoulder, a gesture of human comfort from someone not naturally given to such demonstrations. "You did not fail her, Mr. Brennan. You could not have known the danger, but you can help her now by giving us every detail you remember about that performer. His height, his voice, anything unusual about his appearance or manner." Through halting words interrupted by silent tears, Brennan provides a description that matches what Emily's mother reported: exceptionally tall, pale eyes, educated speech, expensive gloves, incongruous with shabby costume. He adds one new detail, a smell of chemicals that clung to the man, something medicinal, or perhaps photographic in nature, the sharp scent of developing solutions or preservatives. When they finally descend back to the street, full darkness has claimed Whitechapel entirely. The gas lamps create isolated pools of yellow light separated by deep shadows, and fog is beginning to form, that thick December fog that transforms familiar streets into alien landscapes where distance becomes impossible to judge, and sounds carry strangely, distorted by moisture-laden air. Watson pulls his coat tighter, aware of eyes watching from windows and doorways, the district's inhabitants remaining indoors. Now that night has fallen, fear keeping them behind locked doors. Chemical smell. Holmes murmurs as they walk, his voice barely audible over the muffled sounds of the city. Photography, perhaps, or medical preservation techniques. Combined with the mechanical theatre and elaborate puppet construction, we are looking for someone with diverse technical skills, someone educated in multiple disciplines. Not a common street criminal, Watson, but someone who might move in scientific or academic circles, someone whose interest in folklore and punishment might have academic origins that have twisted into something far darker. They make their way toward Thrall Street to find Jacob Marley, the dock worker, who attempted to pursue the creature the previous night. The streets grow progressively more deserted as they penetrate deeper into the residential warrens. Most of the district's workers, now home from their labour, gathered around inadequate fires, trying to wring comfort and warmth from another cold evening. The fog thickens with each passing minute, creating halos around the gas lamps, reducing visibility to perhaps 20 feet, transforming Holmes and Watson into isolated figures moving through a landscape of vapour and shadow. Marley's lodging house is a grim structure, housing perhaps 30 single men in tiny rooms barely larger than closets, the common areas thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of boiled cabbage. They find him in the downstairs parlour, a massive man with shoulders that speak of years hauling cargo, his weathered face carrying the deep lines of someone who has spent decades squinting against sun reflecting off water. He regards them with the natural suspicion of the working class confronted by obvious gentlemen, but Whitmore's name serves as passport, and he agrees to speak with them in a relatively quiet corner of the room. I saw it clear as I see you now. Marley begins without prompting, his voice carrying the authority of someone unaccustomed to being doubted. 7 feet if it was an inch, covered in dark fur or hair, with horns rising from its head like a great stag. It moved wrong, not like a man walks, but with a kind of loping motion, hunched forward, something heavy over its shoulder. The fog was thick, aye, but the creature passed directly beneath a gas lamp, and I saw it plain, saw the bells too, heard them clear, hanging from its belt or harness, ringing with each step. Holmes leans forward intently. You pursued it, I understand. How close did you come before losing sight of it? Not close enough to touch, but close enough to smell it, Marley responds, and Watson sees a flicker of something in the big man's eyes, something that might be fear despite his confident demeanour. It stank of earth and old blood and something else, something chemical that burned my nose, led me straight to the railway arches, and then just vanished, like it stepped through the brick itself. I searched every inch of those arches, know them well from working the area, and there was nothing, no trace of where it went. It was like chasing a ghost, Mr. Holmes, and I am not a man who believes in such things. The bundle it carried, Watson interjects, his medical mind focusing on potential victims. Could you determine its size? Might it have contained a person, perhaps a child? Marley considers this carefully, his brow furrowed. Could have been, certainly. Large enough and the right general shape, though it was wrapped in rough cloth or sacking, impossible to see what lay inside. The creature carried it like it weighed nothing, which suggests either great strength or perhaps less weight than appearances suggested. I did not hear any sounds from the bundle, no crying or struggling, which struck me as odd even at the time. Holmes produces the tuft of horsehair he collected from the railway arch, showing it to Marley. Did you observe any part of the creature's covering closely enough to say whether it might have been costume rather than actual fur? The dock worker studies the sample, then nods slowly. Aye, that could match what I saw. In the moment, in the fog and fear, it seemed real enough. But looking at this now, in clear light, I can see it might have been horsehair dyed dark. The texture seems right. You are saying this was a man in costume then? Someone playing at being a monster? That is precisely what I am saying, Holmes confirms. A man, exceptionally tall, with considerable theatrical skill and knowledge of folklore, who has gone to elaborate lengths to create the appearance of something supernatural. But a man, nonetheless, and therefore vulnerable to the same investigative techniques that have proven effective against countless other criminals. Part 7. They emerge from the lodging house into fog so dense that the gas lamps are reduced to dim smudges of light, barely penetrating more than a few feet into the thick white curtain that has enveloped Whitechapel. Watson finds himself instinctively moving closer to Holmes. The primal human response to reduced visibility and the awareness of danger lurking somewhere in this transformed landscape. Sound carries strangely through the fog, footsteps seeming to come from multiple directions at once, the distant sound of a cart's wheels amplified and distorted until it might be beside them or streets away, impossible to judge. Holmes pauses on the street corner, consulting his pocket watch by holding it close to a gas lamp, the brass case catching the feeble light. Nearly 7 o'clock, he announces, snapping the watch closed. The Pavilion Theatre will have begun its evening performance by now, but the music halls do not typically commence their entertainments until later. I suggest we visit the Pavilion first, speak with the stage manager about recent hirings, anyone who might match our description. Theatrical people tend to know each other, form communities within larger communities. If our puppeteer has connections to legitimate theatre, someone may recognize him from our description. The walk to Whitechapel Road and the Pavilion Theatre feels longer than it should, the fog distorting distance and direction, forcing them to navigate by memory, and the occasional glimpse of familiar landmarks where the vapour parts briefly before closing in again. Watson finds his hand resting on the pistol in his coat pocket, a precaution that seems increasingly necessary as the night deepens and the district grows more isolated despite the proximity of thousands of residents hiding in their rooms. Somewhere in this fog, he thinks, 3 children are being held by a madman who believes himself to be enacting ancient justice, and the thought makes his fingers tighten on the weapon's grip. The theatre, when they finally locate it, glows like a beacon in the fog, its gas-lit facade bright and welcoming, designed to draw customers from the grey streets into the warm promise of entertainment and escape. The sound of music and voices drifts from within, muffled by walls and distance, but unmistakably alive. The eternal sound of human beings gathered to watch stories unfold. Holmes leads them past the ticket booth with a confident nod to the attendant, moving through the lobby with the assurance of someone who has every right to be there. And Watson follows, trusting his friend's ability to navigate social spaces as expertly as he navigates criminal investigations. They find the stage manager in a small office behind the scenes, a harried woman of middle years surrounded by costume pieces and prompt books, simultaneously eating a hasty dinner and making notes in a ledger. She looks up at their entrance with the distracted irritation of someone interrupted during precious free moments. But Holmes's introduction and the mention of police business brings immediate attention, despite his lack of official authority. I am inquiring about theatrical performers who might have worked in this area recently, Holmes begins, settling into the single visitor's chair while Watson remains standing, observing. Specifically, someone operating a travelling puppet show. Quite elaborate mechanical theatre with folktale performances. Tall man, very pale eyes, educated speech. Have you encountered anyone matching that description, seeking work, or asking about theatre connections in Whitechapel? The stage manager sets down her pen, her expression thoughtful. Puppeteers generally operate independently, Mr. Holmes, rarely seeking connections with established theatres. They are a breed apart, proud of their autonomy, often secretive about their techniques and methods. That said, there was a man who came here about a month ago asking about performance spaces available for rent, small venues suitable for intimate shows. He matched some elements of your description. Very tall, certainly. Spoke like a gentleman, though dressed in working clothes. I directed him to several locations that occasionally rent to travelling performers. Nothing came of it, so far as I know. These locations, Holmes says with renewed intensity, could you provide their addresses? And did this man give a name? Any identification? She reaches for a different ledger, flipping through pages covered in cramped handwriting. He called himself Gottfried, said it was a family name from his mother's German ancestry. Did not provide a surname that I recall. As for the locations, there are 3 I typically recommend. A warehouse space on Gower's Walk that has been converted for occasional performances. A room above the Crown and Anchor public house on Cable Street, and an old chapel on Greenfield Street that was deconsecrated years ago and now serves various community purposes. She copies the specific addresses onto a slip of paper, handing it to Holmes. Is this man dangerous? Should I have been more cautious in my dealings with him? Potentially very dangerous, Holmes acknowledges, pocketing the paper. If he contacts you again, send word immediately to Scotland Yard, Inspector Bradstreet, and do not engage with him directly. You have been most helpful. He rises, preparing to depart, then pauses. This name, Gottfried, does it mean anything to you beyond its German origins? The stage manager shakes her head. Only that it is an old name, rather archaic. You do not hear it often in modern times. My grandmother had a brother by that name, dead these 40 years. Why do you ask? Because names often carry significance to those who choose them. Holmes responds cryptically. They reveal something of how the individual sees themselves, what identity they wish to project. Thank you again for your assistance. Back on the street, the fog has grown even denser, if such a thing is possible. The world reduced to a sphere of perhaps 10 feet in all directions, beyond which lies impenetrable white opacity. Holmes stands perfectly still for a moment, and Watson can see his friend's mind working through the new information, connecting it to everything else they have learned. Gottfried, Holmes murmurs, the German name meaning God's peace, and Krampus is a figure from Germanic folklore. Our performer is creating a complete identity rooted in the cultural traditions he is exploiting. The theatrical commitment is remarkable, Watson. This is not simple madness, but something far more organized and deliberate. The locations the stage manager mentioned, Watson says, Should we investigate them tonight? If the children are being held somewhere, every hour matters. Holmes nods decisively. We shall begin with the deconsecrated chapel on Greenfield Street, as it is closest, and the name alone suggests interesting possibilities. A religious space stripped of its sanctity, now used for secular purposes, perhaps even theatrical performances. It would appeal to someone with our Gottfried's apparent sense of ironic staging. He begins walking, moving with confident purpose through the fog despite the limited visibility, his internal map of London's streets guiding him unerringly toward their destination. The old chapel materializes from the fog like a ghost itself, a small brick structure with boarded windows and a wooden door that has seen better decades. The building sits isolated on a corner where 3 streets meet, surrounded by a low iron fence largely collapsed with neglect. No light shows from within, no sound emerges to suggest occupation, but Holmes approaches with caution nonetheless, gesturing for Watson to remain alert as they circle the structure, looking for alternative entrances or signs of recent use. The rear of the building reveals a cellar entrance, wooden doors set at an angle into the ground, secured with a new padlock that gleams even in the fog's diffused light. Holmes crouches beside it, producing his lockpicks with the practiced ease of long experience. And Watson keeps watch, his hand once more on his pistol, every sense straining against the fog for any indication of approaching danger. The lock yields after perhaps 2 minutes of manipulation, and Holmes carefully pulls open one of the doors, revealing stone steps descending into absolute darkness. "Wait," Watson whispers urgently. "We cannot simply rush into unknown darkness. We have no idea what or who might be down there." Holmes produces a small dark lantern from his coat, a tool Watson has seen him carry countless times, prepared for exactly such situations. The lantern's focused beam cuts through the darkness as they descend carefully, their footsteps silent on stone worn smooth by generations of feet, the air growing noticeably colder and damper with each step downward. The smell of earth dominates initially, but beneath it, Watson detects other scents. Old incense perhaps, candle wax, and something else. Something organic and unpleasant that makes his medical training send warning signals. The cellar proves to be larger than the chapel's footprint above, extending beneath adjacent buildings in a way that suggests older construction, remnants of structures that stood here before the current neighborhood was built. Holmes's lantern reveals brick archways leading to multiple chambers, storage areas filled with forgotten furniture and religious artifacts from the chapel's active years. They move methodically through the space, examining each area, finding nothing immediately suspicious until they reach the farthest chamber, the one most deeply buried beneath the surrounding buildings. Here they find evidence of recent occupation, a workbench littered with tools and materials, horsehair and fabric and leather straps, the components of costume construction. Wooden forms stand in corners, approximating human shapes, used for fitting and adjusting the elaborate costume that hangs from a hook on the far wall. Watson approaches it slowly, his lantern revealing the full horror of the creation. Dark fur covering every surface, carefully constructed to suggest something between human and beast, with articulated joints that would allow natural movement. The headpiece features genuine deer antlers, mounted above a face that combines human and demonic features, painted and sculpted to terrify. Bells hang from a leather harness, and beside it, leans a bundle of birch switches, bound with cord identical to the one found near Sarah's home. "Dear God," Watson breathes, his voice barely audible. This is extraordinarily elaborate, the work of months, perhaps years of planning and construction. Holmes moves past the costume to examine the workbench more closely, his fingers hovering over various items without touching them, preserving evidence while absorbing every detail. "Photographs," he says suddenly, holding up several images to the light. Watson joins him, and they study the photographs together, seeing images of children at play, children walking to school, children sitting in audiences watching puppet shows. Emily, William, and Sarah are all represented, multiple photographs of each, documenting their movements and habits. He has been watching them for weeks, Watson says, revulsion clear in his voice, planning every detail of their abductions. But where are they now? Where are the children being kept? Holmes continues searching, moving systematically through drawers and examining papers scattered across the work surface. He finds sketches, elaborate drawings of what appears to be ritual spaces, chambers with specific arrangements of candles and symbols, notes written in German describing traditional Krampus ceremonies. And finally, tucked beneath other papers, a map of Whitechapel with 3 locations marked in red ink, the sites where each child disappeared. A 4th location is circled but not yet marked, a spot near the docks labelled in German script that Holmes translates aloud, Der letzte Tanz, the final dance. He is planning something for a 4th location, Holmes says grimly. Either another abduction, or perhaps something involving all 3 children together. Watson, we must find where he is keeping them before he moves to this final stage of whatever ritual or performance he has planned. Part 8. Holmes carefully photographs the map and documents with a small camera he produces from his coat. The flash powder briefly illuminating the cellar with harsh white light that leaves after images dancing in Watson's vision. They work quickly now, urgency driving them, cataloguing everything in the workshop while remaining alert for any sound that might indicate the owner's return. Watson finds himself repeatedly glancing toward the stairs, half expecting to see that horned silhouette descending toward them, bells announcing its presence with each step. In a wooden crate beneath the workbench, Holmes discovers something that makes him go very still, his entire body tensing with controlled fury. He reaches in carefully and withdraws 3 small items, laying them on the bench with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics: a child's hair ribbon, faded blue, a small wooden soldier, paint chipped from countless hours of play, a rag doll with 1 button eye missing, clutched so often the fabric has worn thin. Personal possessions, Watson realizes with a sinking heart. Tokens taken from the children, proof of their capture, perhaps kept as trophies, or for some purpose in whatever twisted ritual is being enacted. Emily's ribbon, Holmes says quietly, his voice tight with emotion rarely displayed. Mrs. Marsh mentioned she was wearing a blue ribbon the day she disappeared. And this soldier would belong to William, I suspect. The kind of toy a boy of 10 might carry in his pocket. The doll must be Sarah's. He wraps each item carefully in separate handkerchiefs, his movements precise despite the anger Watson can see vibrating through him. These children are still alive, Watson. He has kept them alive for days now, which means they serve some purpose beyond immediate harm. We must determine what that purpose is and where they are being held before he completes whatever plan drives him. A sound from above freezes them both, a door opening somewhere in the chapel proper. Footsteps crossing wooden flooring with slow deliberation. Holmes extinguishes his lantern immediately, plunging them into absolute darkness. And Watson feels his friend's hand grip his arm, guiding him silently toward one of the archways leading to an adjacent chamber. They move by touch and memory, their breathing carefully controlled, every sense straining to interpret the sounds from above. The footsteps pause, then begin descending the cellar stairs, accompanied now by the soft glow of candlelight that grows stronger as the person approaches. Watson's hand closes on his pistol grip, but Holmes's touch on his wrist counsels patience, waiting to see who has entered this hidden workshop. The candlelight reveals a figure in the doorway of the main chamber, tall and thin, wrapped in a heavy coat, face obscured by shadow and the fog of breath in cold air. "I know someone has been here," a voice calls out, cultured and calm, speaking with a slight accent that confirms German origins. The padlock was disturbed, dust patterns on the stairs disrupted. "You have found my workshop, my preparations, but you have not found what truly matters." The figure moves into the room, and candlelight finally illuminates the face. Pale eyes like winter ice, sharp features suggesting both intelligence and something fundamentally damaged, a smile that contains no warmth. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume. Your reputation precedes you, and Dr. Watson, ever faithful companion to genius. How delightful that you have joined my performance." Holmes steps from the shadows, his posture relaxed, but Watson can see the coiled readiness in his frame, prepared to move with deadly speed if necessary. "Gottfried," he says, making the name both identification and accusation. Or should I say, Professor Werner Gottfried, formerly of Heidelberg University, dismissed for unethical experimentation involving behavioral modification in children. "Yes, I recognized your techniques in the puppet shows, your theories about fear and discipline that caused such scandal in academic circles 5 years ago." The man who calls himself Gottfried shows no surprise at being identified. Indeed, seems pleased by the recognition. "You have done your research quickly, Herr Holmes." "Yes, I am Werner Gottfried, and my work at Heidelberg was terminated by small minds who could not comprehend the importance of my discoveries. Children are not born moral. They must be taught through appropriate consequences, through fear and discipline applied at crucial developmental moments. The old traditions understood this. The legends of Krampus and similar figures existed to create necessary terror, to shape behavior through the threat of supernatural punishment. Your theories were discredited, Holmes says, his voice carrying absolute contempt. Your experiments caused lasting psychological damage to the children subjected to them. You were not simply dismissed, but barred from further academic work, prohibited from any contact with children. And yet, here you are, acting out your discredited theories on London streets, stealing children to subject them to your twisted vision of proper discipline. Gottfried sets his candle on the workbench, his movements unhurried, a man confident in his position despite being confronted by 2 determined pursuers. "I am not acting out theories, Herr Holmes. I am perfecting them. The children I have selected were demonstrably in need of correction, exhibiting behaviors that would lead them inevitably toward criminal lives if left unchanged. I am providing a service to society, using traditional methods that modern weakness has abandoned, Fear is the beginning of wisdom, and I am teaching these children wisdom through carefully calibrated terror. Watson can contain himself no longer, stepping forward with his pistol now clearly visible. Where are the children? What have you done to them? His voice shakes with barely controlled rage, his medical oath and basic humanity both outraged by this calm discussion of child abuse disguised as pedagogy. They are safe, Gottfried responds, his pale eyes flickering to the weapon without apparent concern. They are experiencing a traditional Krampusnacht ceremony, learning the consequences of wickedness through immersive theatre that will transform their behaviour permanently. By morning, they will be returned to their families as reformed individuals, grateful for the correction they have received. The legend will be complete. The community will understand the power of traditional discipline, and my theories will be vindicated. Holmes moves slightly, positioning himself between Gottfried and the exit, his mind clearly working through angles and possibilities. You speak of returning them by morning, which suggests tonight is your culmination, your final performance. The fourth location marked on your map, near the docks, that is where they are now, where you have constructed your ceremonial space. A flicker of surprise crosses Gottfried's face at this deduction, quickly suppressed. You found my map. Clever. Yes, tonight is the culmination, the night of December 18th, traditional Krampusnacht in Alpine regions. The children have been prepared through isolation and controlled fear, their minds made receptive to the lessons I will teach. By dawn, the transformation will be complete. Transformation. Watson spits the word like a curse. You mean psychological torture of innocence, who cannot possibly understand or consent to your demented experiments. You are no professor, no scientist. You are simply a man who enjoys frightening children and has constructed elaborate justifications for your cruelty. Gottfried's composure finally cracks, anger flashing across his features. You understand nothing. Modern society coddles children, treats them as precious creatures to be protected from all hardship, and then wonders why they grow into weak, undisciplined adults. The old ways understood that childhood must include fear, must include consequences, must shape the soul through carefully applied terror. I am restoring what has been lost, demonstrating the effectiveness of traditional methods. Holmes's voice cuts through the growing tension like a blade, cold and precise. You are under arrest, Professor Gottfried, for the abduction of 3 children and conspiracy to commit further crimes. Dr. Watson, would you be so good as to keep your pistol trained on our friend while I secure his hands? We will deliver him to Scotland Yard, and then proceed immediately to rescue the children from whatever horror he has prepared for them. But Gottfried's smile returns, and there is something deeply unsettling in it, a confidence that suggests he still holds cards unplayed. I think not, Herr Holmes. You see, I anticipated the possibility of discovery, planned for this eventuality, as I have planned for everything else. The children's location is known only to me, and the ceremony has already begun, initiated by mechanical timers I constructed specifically for this purpose. Even now, the final phase is unfolding, and without my intervention to halt the sequence, the experience will continue to its natural conclusion. You can arrest me, certainly, but can you find 3 children hidden somewhere in the vast warren of Whitechapel's docks before the ceremony completes itself, before the psychological effects become permanent? Watson sees Holmes's jaw tighten, recognizes the terrible calculation his his friend is being forced to make. They could detain Gottfried, summon police, proceed through proper channels, but every moment wasted is a moment those children suffer through whatever elaborate torture has been designed for them. Or they could force Gottfried to lead them to the children immediately, but that means operating outside legal boundaries, means potentially allowing a dangerous criminal to escape justice if circumstances turn against them. How long? Holmes asks finally, his voice carefully controlled. How long until this ceremony of yours reaches its conclusion? Gottfried consults a pocket watch, the gesture almost theatrical in its precision. 4 hours, perhaps 5 at most. The sequence was designed to last through the night, to exhaust the children psychologically, to break down their resistance until they accept the lessons being taught. By dawn, it will be complete, and the children will be forever changed. Then you will take us to them now, Holmes says with finality. You will guide us to this location, and you will halt whatever mechanical nightmare you have constructed. And then, Professor Gottfried, you will answer for your crimes in a court of law, where your theories will receive the judgment they deserve. And if I refuse? Gottfried asks, though the question seems more curious than defiant. If I simply remain silent, force you to search blindly while the clock runs down, what will you do then, Herr Holmes? How far will you bend your famous principles to save 3 children you have never met? The silence that follows is heavy with implication, with the weight of impossible choices, and the knowledge that whatever happens next will define not just this case, but the very nature of justice itself. Part 9. Holmes stands perfectly still for a long moment, his grey eyes locked with Gottfried's pale ones, and Watson can see the internal struggle playing across his friend's usually impassive features. The detective has always operated within the bounds of law, has always insisted that civilization depends upon rules applied equally to all, that the moment one begins making exceptions, no matter how justified they seem, the entire structure begins to crumble. But now, those principles confront the immediate suffering of 3 innocent children, and Watson watches as Holmes weighs abstract justice against concrete mercy. You miscalculate, Professor, Holmes says finally, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. You assume I require your cooperation, that without your guidance we are helpless. But you have already provided everything necessary to locate your ceremony. The map shows the docks, a specific area near the old timber yards, where abandoned warehouses provide exactly the kind of isolated space your theatrical production requires. The mechanical timers you mentioned so proudly suggest electrical or clockwork mechanisms, which require power sources or regular winding, limiting possible locations to structures with either gas or recent human access. And your personality, your need for symbolic completion, tells me you would choose a location with appropriate aesthetic qualities, somewhere that echoes the alpine caves and forests where Krampus legends originated. Watson sees uncertainty flicker across Gottfried's face for the first time, the professor's confidence wavering as he realizes his leverage may be less absolute than he believed. Holmes continues, his voice taking on that quality of inexorable logic that Watson has heard dismantle countless criminal plans. There are perhaps 3 locations in the dock area that meet all these criteria, Holmes says, moving slowly around the cellar as he speaks. His movements casual, but Watson recognizes the tactical positioning, placing himself between Gottfried and any possible escape route, The old Shadwell warehouse with its intact gas lines, the converted ice house near Wapping Pier with its cave-like interior, or the derelict customs house with its basement chambers. We will find your ceremony, Professor, with or without your assistance. The only question is whether you accompany us willingly, with the possibility that cooperation might be viewed favourably by the courts, or whether we leave you bound here while we conduct our search, and you face the full weight of the law with no mitigating circumstances. Gottfried's composure is cracking now, his carefully constructed superiority eroding under Holmes's relentless reasoning. You cannot possibly search all 3 locations in time, he protests, but his voice carries less certainty. The mechanisms are complex, designed to resist tampering. Even if you find the right location, you will need my expertise to safely shut down the sequence without causing harm to the children. Then you will provide that expertise, Holmes says with finality. You will guide us directly to the location. You will deactivate your mechanisms, and you will do so immediately. Because if you do not, if even one of those children suffers permanent harm because of your deliberate obstruction, I will personally ensure that you are charged not merely with abduction, but with the most serious crimes available under British law. And I will testify at your trial about your calculated cruelty, your sadistic pleasure in terrorizing innocents, your complete lack of remorse. Whatever academic reputation you hope to preserve, whatever legacy you imagine for your theories, I will see it destroyed absolutely. The 2 men stare at each other across the dim cellar. Will's locked in silent battle, and Watson keeps his pistol trained steadily on Gottfried, while his heart pounds with mixture of hope and dread. Outside, the fog presses against the building, and the night deepens toward those darkest hours before dawn, when human vitality ebbs lowest, when hope becomes hardest to sustain. Finally, Gottfried's shoulders slump infinitesimally, the gesture of surrender barely perceptible, but unmistakable to trained observers. The ice house, he says quietly, near Wapping Pier. The children are in the lower chamber, secured but unharmed beyond the psychological effects of the ceremony. I will take you there. I will deactivate the mechanisms. But you must understand, Herr Holmes, my work is important. History will vindicate my theories, even if present-day morality condemns their application. History will judge you a monster who terrorized children, Watson says harshly, unable to contain his disgust any longer. Whatever academic language you dress it in, whatever theoretical framework you construct, you are nothing more than a cruel man who enjoys inflicting fear on those too small and powerless to resist. Now move, and if you attempt escape or any further delay, I will not hesitate to shoot you in the leg and drag you to that ice house myself. They ascend from the cellar into the fog-wrapped night, Gottfried moving ahead with Holmes close behind, and Watson bringing up the rear, pistol ready, every sense alert for treachery. The streets are utterly deserted now, the residents of Whitechapel sealed in their homes, and their footsteps echo strangely in the thick air, sound bouncing off invisible walls, making navigation even more disorienting than usual. Gottfried leads them through narrow lanes and across thoroughfares, his path suggesting intimate knowledge of these streets, of routes that avoid main roads and police beats. The walk to Wapping Pier takes perhaps 20 minutes that feel like hours, the tension stretched taut between captor and captive, the knowledge of children suffering, lending desperate urgency to every step. The docks materialize from fog like an otherworldly landscape. Great wooden pilings disappearing into Thames mist. Warehouses looming as geometric shadows against the slightly lighter darkness of cloud-covered sky. The smell of river dominates here, that distinctive Thames scent of water and mud, and the accumulated commerce of empire, tar and spice, and things rotting in tidal pools. The icehouse sits partially sunken into the earth, its entrance a heavy wooden door set at an angle, designed to preserve cold during summer months when ice imported from Norway and America was stored in the deep chambers below. Gottfried produces a key and unlocks the door, revealing stairs descending into darkness that seems almost absolute after even the faint illumination of fog-diffused gas lamps. Holmes lights his lantern again as they descend, the narrow beam revealing walls of thick brick designed to insulate, ceiling dripping with condensation, creating a constant soft patter like distant rain. The temperature drops noticeably with each step downward, and Watson's breath becomes visible, small clouds of vapour appearing with each exhalation. The stairs seem to go on forever, spiralling down into earth in a way that suggests the structure extends much deeper than surface appearance indicated. At the base of the stairs, they find themselves in a large chamber, empty now of ice, but retaining that bone-deep cold that comes from stone and earth never touched by sun. But it is not empty of everything. Holmes's lantern reveals an elaborate construction occupying the center of the space, a wooden framework supporting what appears to be a small theatrical stage, complete with painted scenery depicting mountains and forests rendered in dark, unsettling style. Mechanical devices line the edges of the platform, clockwork mechanisms connected by wires to various effects, bells and chains, and moving figures designed to create the illusion of supernatural presence. And in 3 wooden chairs facing this nightmarish stage sit the children, Emily and William and Sarah, bound with soft rope that would not mark their skin but would prevent escape, their eyes covered with cloth blindfolds, their ears blocked with some kind of padding that explains why they do not react to the arrival of their rescuers. They appear unconscious, or perhaps merely exhausted beyond waking, their small bodies slumped in their restraints, and Watson's heart nearly stops at the sight before his medical training kicks in, and he notes the regular rise and fall of breathing, the healthy colour beneath the pallor of exhaustion. Dear God, Watson breathes, moving immediately toward the children, while Holmes keeps his attention and lantern trained on Gottfried. Holmes, they are alive, but appear to have been drugged. Help me get these blindfolds off. Get them free of these restraints. But Holmes holds up a warning hand. Wait, Watson. Professor Gottfried, you will deactivate your mechanisms first, exactly as you promised. If there are any traps, any final cruelties embedded in this apparatus, now is the moment to reveal them. Gottfried moves to the mechanical array with the confident efficiency of an engineer examining familiar equipment. His hands move across the devices, throwing switches, stopping clockwork gears, disconnecting wires, and gradually the various mechanisms wind down into silence. He works methodically, and Watson watches with physician's attention, ready to intervene at any sign of deception or danger to the children. It is done, Gottfried announces finally, stepping back from the now silent apparatus. The ceremony is halted, the mechanisms deactivated. The children have experienced perhaps 6 hours of carefully calibrated audio-visual stimulation, designed to instill proper fear of consequences for misbehavior. They will remember it as dreams, nightmares perhaps, but the psychological imprinting will have occurred. They will be better children, better citizens for this experience. Watson can no longer contain his fury, moving toward Gottfried with fists clenched, ready to deliver the physical violence this monster so richly deserves. But Holmes intercepts him, voice urgent. "Watson, the children need your medical attention. See to them while I secure our prisoner. There will be time for righteous anger later, but now the children must be our priority." Part 10. Watson forces himself to turn away from Gottfried, channeling his rage into the careful work of medical assessment, moving from child to child with practiced efficiency, while his hands remain steady despite the fury burning in his chest. He removes Emily's blindfold first, his fingers gentle as they work the knot free, and her eyes flutter open briefly, unfocused and confused, before closing again. Her pulse is steady but slow, respiration regular, pupils responding normally to the lantern light when he checks them. She has been drugged, certainly, but with something mild enough to wear off naturally, designed to keep the children compliant, rather than cause lasting harm. William and Sarah show similar signs, all three children deep in chemically induced sleep that has protected them somewhat from the full horror of whatever sensory assault Gottfried designed for them. Watson works methodically, checking each child for injuries, finding only the expected marks of restraint, minor abrasions on wrists and ankles where the ropes held them, nothing that will not heal completely within days. His medical bag yields smelling salts, and he administers them carefully, bringing each child toward wakefulness with gentle persistence, speaking softly, reassuring them that they are safe now, that the nightmares are over. Holmes has secured Gottfried with the man's own rope, binding his hands behind him with knots that will not slip or loosen, and now stands examining the mechanical apparatus with evident fascination, despite the grim circumstances of its construction. "Quite ingenious in its way," he murmurs, almost to himself. Clockwork timing mechanisms, coordinated with gas jets, to create flickering light effects, bells and chains activated at calculated intervals, even a phonograph device to play recorded sounds, roars and screams designed to simulate demonic presence. The whole contraption designed to run autonomously for hours, creating an immersive experience that would be terrifying to children already primed through the puppet show presentations. Ingenious. Watson spits the word while cradling Sarah's small form as she begins to stir, whimpering softly against his shoulder. "It is monstrous, Holmes, nothing more. The application of technical skill to the torture of innocence is not genius. It is depravity dressed in academic robes." "I do not disagree," Holmes replies quietly, his attention still on the apparatus. "I merely observe the mechanism as I would observe any aspect of a crime, the better to provide testimony that will ensure conviction. Professor Gottfried's technical sophistication will work against him in court, will demonstrate premeditation and elaborate planning that precludes any defense of momentary madness or loss of control." Emily wakes more fully now, her eyes opening wide with fear, before Watson's familiar medical presence and gentle voice calm her panic. "You are safe," he tells her, his tone carrying absolute conviction. "The bad dreams are over. We are taking you home to your mother, who has been so worried about you. Can you tell me your name, Emily? Can you tell me where you hurt?" The child's voice emerges as barely a whisper, rough from disuse and crying. "Emily Marsh. My head hurts. I want my mummy. The monster, the horned monster. It was so loud, so terrible. It said I was wicked, that I needed to be punished forever. Fresh tears begin streaming down her small face, and Watson gathers her close, his own eyes burning with sympathetic fury. There was no monster, he tells her firmly. Only a bad man who has been caught and will never hurt anyone again. You are not wicked, Emily. You are a good child who sometimes makes mistakes, as all children do. But that does not make you bad. Do you understand me? Nothing that happened here was your fault. William rouses next, his confusion giving way quickly to the stoic attempt at bravery that 10-year-old boys often display, trying not to cry, even as his body shakes with reaction to trauma and lingering drug effects. Sarah remains the most deeply affected, waking with screams that echo through the cold chamber, her small body rigid with terror, until Watson's gentle hands and soothing medical voice penetrate her panic, gradually bringing her back to reality and safety. Holmes has moved to stand guard at the stairs, ensuring no interruption during this delicate process of recovery. And Watson can see his friend's profile sharp against the lantern light, jaw set with that particular tension that indicates powerful emotion carefully controlled. They remain in the ice house for perhaps 30 minutes, allowing the children time to fully wake, to drink water from Watson's flask, to begin the long process of understanding that their ordeal has ended. Finally, Watson judges them stable enough for movement, and they begin the slow ascent back to street level. Watson carrying Sarah, while Emily and William lean on each other for support, their legs unsteady after days of confinement. Holmes brings up the rear, guiding Gottfried with one hand while holding the lantern aloft with the other, ensuring no one stumbles on the steep stairs in the darkness. The fog has lifted somewhat by the time they emerge. The night now in those deepest hours before dawn, when the world seems suspended between darkness and light, when even London falls into temporary silence, as the nocturnal creatures seek rest and the diurnal ones have not yet stirred. Holmes produces a police whistle from his pocket and sounds it 3 times, the sharp blast cutting through the quiet. And within minutes, a constable appears, his footsteps hurrying toward the sound with the urgency of an officer who knows that whistles at this hour mean serious business. The constable's face shows shock at the scene before him. 3 children in obvious distress, a bound prisoner, and 2 gentlemen who clearly do not belong in this rough dock neighbourhood at such an hour. But Holmes's rapid explanation and the authority in his voice cut through confusion, and soon the constable is dispatching messages to Scotland Yard, summoning both Inspector Bradstreet and carriages to transport the children home to their families. The wait for official assistance stretches perhaps 20 minutes, during which Watson maintains his medical vigil over the children, while Holmes provides a detailed preliminary statement to the constable, ensuring that the chain of evidence remains intact, that proper procedures are followed despite the irregular circumstances of the rescue. Gottfried remains silent throughout, his expression now blank, the earlier confidence and professorial superiority completely evaporated, leaving only a man beginning to comprehend the full consequences of his actions. Inspector Bradstreet arrives with the dawn, the first grey light of morning beginning to dilute the darkness, and his face shows a mixture of relief and professional chagrin at having been beaten to the solution by a consulting detective. But he has the grace to acknowledge Holmes's success, shaking his hand firmly and offering genuine thanks for the safe recovery of the children. We will take custody of the prisoner and ensure he faces full prosecution, Bradstreet promises. And I will need complete statements from both of you, though that can wait until you have rested. You have done remarkable work tonight, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. Those children owe you their lives and sanity. The carriages arrive as full dawn breaks, pale winter sunlight finally penetrating the clouds, and Watson rides with the children to their respective homes, witnessing 3 reunions that leave him simultaneously uplifted and emotionally exhausted. Mrs. Marsh collapses to her knees when Emily is returned to her, sobbing with relief and gratitude, clutching her daughter as if she will never let go. William's father lifts his son in arms that shake with emotion, his earlier anger transformed into protective tenderness. And Sarah's parents, both present despite the early hour, hold their child between them and weep with the abandon of those who have passed through hell and emerged into light. Holmes and Watson finally return to Baker Street as morning traffic begins filling the streets, the city coming alive around them, and the familiar rooms seem almost unbearably welcoming after the night's ordeal. Mrs. Hudson has anticipated their return, has breakfast waiting, and fresh tea, and a fire built high against the December cold. They collapse into their chairs with the boneless exhaustion that follows adrenaline's departure, and for long minutes simply sit in silence, processing everything that has occurred. "You saved them," Watson says finally, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "You saved 3 children from a fate that might have destroyed them psychologically. Whatever else happens, whatever complications arise from the irregular aspects of tonight's work, that achievement stands absolute and unassailable." Holmes stares into the fire, his face showing the weariness that comes not from physical exertion, but from confronting human darkness in its most calculated form. "We saved them," he corrects gently. "Your medical skill and compassion were as essential as any deductive reasoning I provided. And they are not fully saved, Watson. The psychological effects of their ordeal will linger, will require time and care to overcome. But yes, they are alive and home, which is infinitely better than the alternative." He pauses, then adds quietly, "Sometimes I wonder if cases like this, dealing with crimes against children, take more from us than other investigations. There is something particularly draining about confronting evil that targets the most vulnerable. Because it forces us to acknowledge how thin the line is between civilization and barbarism," Watson suggests. "How easily someone can convince themselves that cruelty serves higher purpose, that their theories justify any action. Gottfried genuinely believed he was improving those children, conducting valuable research. That makes him more disturbing than simple malice would." They sit in companionable silence as morning brightens beyond the windows, as London fully wakes and begins its daily business, as the extraordinary events of the night recede into memory and will eventually become another case file, another story Watson might write for publication, after names and details are changed to protect the innocent. The fire crackles with its eternal voice, and the comfort of familiar surroundings begins to restore their spirits, to remind them that despite the darkness they sometimes navigate, they return always to this sanctuary of reason and friendship and warmth. "The children will heal," Holmes says finally, with the confidence of someone who has seen human resilience triumph over terrible circumstances before. They have families who love them, a community that will support them, and the knowledge that the monster was human and has been caught. That last piece matters more than people often realize, Watson. Knowing that the thing you feared was not supernatural, was not unstoppable, but merely a twisted man now facing justice. That knowledge allows recovery to begin. Watson nods agreement, too tired for extensive conversation, but grateful for his friend's words, for the wisdom that comes from years of observing human nature in all its complexity. Outside, church bells begin marking the hour, their voices carrying across the city, calling the faithful to morning services. And Watson thinks of Christmas approaching, of the season meant to celebrate hope and renewal, and feels grateful that 3 families will have their children home for the holidays, that the Krampus of Whitechapel has been revealed as human fraud rather than supernatural terror. As the day progresses and they rest, as official reports are filed and newspapers begin carrying stories of the rescue, as the district of Whitechapel slowly releases the fear that has gripped it for a week, Watson finds himself thinking about stories and legends, about how humans create monsters to explain evil, to give shape to fears that might otherwise prove overwhelming. The real monsters, he reflects, are always human, are always the result of choices made and lines crossed, of intelligence divorced from empathy, and theories pursued without ethical constraint. But there are also heroes, he thinks, watching Holmes doze in his chair by the fire, the great detective's face peaceful in exhausted sleep. There are people who confront the monsters, who stand between the vulnerable and those who would harm them, who apply reason and courage and stubborn determination to problems that seem insoluble. And sometimes, if fortune favors and skill prevails, the monsters are caught and the innocent are saved, and morning comes as proof that darkness, however deep, is never permanent. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through fog-wrapped streets and gothic mystery, through a case that tested the limits of reason and compassion, through a night that ended with children restored to safety and love. If you enjoyed this atmospheric mystery, please consider subscribing to see more stories like this one. Tales designed to carry you gently into sleep while engaging your imagination with puzzles and period detail and the eternal struggle between good and evil. Leave a like if this story brought you comfort or entertainment, and share your thoughts in the comments about what mysteries you would like to explore next. Until we meet again in another story, in another time and place, where mysteries wait to be solved, and sleep comes as gentle reward for a day well lived, I wish you the most peaceful of nights, the sweetest of dreams, and the comforting knowledge that morning always follows darkness, that reason can triumph over fear, and that somewhere in the world, someone is always standing watch, ensuring that the vulnerable are protected and the wicked are brought to justice. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well and dream of gaslit streets and cozy fires and mysteries solved by brilliant minds working in service of what is right and just and good. Good night.